Those in front of you are the best 5 music streaming apps in 2024, although the real competition for the best is just between 3 of them. This was the ranking according to the number of users. These 3 platforms are quite similar on most features: music library, quality of sound, but except for the price. Spotify, in a sudden move, raised subscription fees from $10.99 to $11.99. This might be seen as normal and slightly upsetting for most users, but this hike was the result of a big unfair competition with Apple Music, and this steal could make Spotify go bankrupt earlier than you think. According to Spotify earning reports, in 2024, Spotify reached a top all-time revenue record with $15.2 billion. This is more than the previous year's statistics, which grew significantly from the time it launched. But despite all of that, Spotify net loss was $131 million. Not as bad as last year, but still another loss record. This has many explanations, like the Spotify main business model, which in simple explanation makes the company pay 70% of all their revenues for artists and music companies, and keeping 30% to operate. This percentage is not enough, but still keeps Spotify going. But the other reason, as stated in the title, is Apple Music. Not YouTube Music, nor Amazon Music. Apple Music, and behind it, Apple. On March 4th, 2024, the EU ruled that Apple must pay a $2 billion fine because of a Spotify complaint. This was a massive case rule, and affected the whole Apple company. To understand the importance of this case, Spotify launched a public campaign called Time to Play Fair, and made a website specifically for it. Also, Spotify's CEO Daniel Ek publicly criticized Apple, describing it as greedy. So, what happened? It all starts from where you download your apps. App Store if you're using iPhone or Apple device, and Play Store if you're using Android. But these are not just marketplaces. They're also the main payment gateway for most of the apps. The App Store was the first part of Spotify case with Apple. For every purchase made through the App Store, Apple takes a 30% of the amount, and that rules on all, including Spotify. So, while you're paying $11.99 for your subscription, Spotify gets $8.39. Well, that's normal, and Spotify knows about it before even joining the store. But in 2015, Apple launched Apple Music, and launched with it the biggest conflict in Apple history. Apple started pre-installing Apple Music on most of their iPhones, and sending a 2.2 billion users notifications about their new app. Also, since Apple Music is from Apple, so the app won't have to pay the 30% commission to the App Store. Although that was kind of unfair, and made it harder for Spotify to compete, Spotify had an idea. Instead, for the direct form of payment through the App Store, Spotify wanted to get you to their website, where you can make the payment directly, then go back to the app. But Apple didn't approve it, and Spotify couldn't even mention in the app that there was another way to subscribe. But Apple's actions didn't stop there. Apple has imposed a lot of technical restrictions for the iOS in the last years. Spotify wasn't targeted specifically with these restrictions, but it affected most apps on App Store. For example, rather than restricting any app on the App Store of adding external links, directing users for a subscription or purchases outside the system, Apple is not allowing third-party music apps to integrate with Siri, but you guessed it, Apple Music can. The good news is that this restriction was partially lifted later, but integration remains more limited and not allowed for devices like the HomePod. The delayed approval for Apps Update was also a major point in Spotify complaint. And that's not just with Spotify, but many other developers, which by accident the delay was particularly for those that introduce features competing with Apple's services. The amount of data and analytics are also limited for developers to collect. I do actually agree with Apple over this, because many of you remember the conflict with Facebook over that, so I side with Apple on this one. But there is a question. When I was researching this video, I found an important point. Apple Store and Play Store has the same commission 30%, and also Google has YouTube Music, which is a competitor for Spotify too. So why didn't Spotify sue Google? The answer is simple. Unlike most what's told in the Apple restrictions, Google Android is completely the opposite. The app review process is very faster for all apps, more freedom in how apps can accept their payments, and also there is not much monopolistic concerns from developers, as Apple's control over its ecosystem, hardware and software, destroying the competition by promoting their own apps and giving them advantages over the others. But why don't we look at it from Apple perspective? Apple defense is very strong at this point. I was even convinced when I read it. Apple argues that the 30% commission fee is the global standard, which is right, and that these fees are important to keep the service at top level. Also, in face of these critics, Apple introduced the App Store Small Business Program, which reduced the commission to 15% for developers earning less than $1 million per year. Not use Spotify. Also, the user privacy and security is a great tool in Apple hand. They argue that this system helps protect users from frauds and malicious website, which is right sometimes. But this next one will got you. Apple says that the App Store guidelines apply equally to everyone, even on their own services. How? How Apple Music is going to pay 30% commission to Apple, which owns it itself? That's not logical. And you know what's more illogical? Is that you watched the full video, and I still didn't hear your opinion. I want to know it in the comments, and while you're there, leave a like and a subscribe. Thanks for watching.